With the bracket, let's take a look a little bit further down the line at our college football playoff rankings presented by Chick-fil-A. Your top two the same. Oklahoma, Iowa cracking the top four this week. Michigan State now with their big win against Ohio State. Many think they should be in the top four, but they're right there. And both Iowa and Michigan State could end up playing each other in the Big Ten Championship. Notre Dame really right now on the outside looking in. Baylor's still hanging around. Ohio State with their first loss last week slide to number 8. Michigan, they will play Ohio State this weekend, rounding out the top 10. Irish eyes are not smiling, gentlemen. As we mentioned, Notre Dame is out. First, can we agree that the top 5 teams control their own destinies? If they win, they're in.
I believe that, especially because of the clause that the selection committee has, that for an independent like Notre Dame to get into the top 4, they must be unequivocally one of the top 4 teams in the nation. With so little left on the schedules for these teams, I just don't see any way that a single win over Stanford could put Notre Dame in a position where the committee would think they are unequivocally better than any of those teams that wins out and becomes a conference champion.
Yeah, in Oklahoma, if they win and they're the Big 12 champion, I think there's a human desire among the committee that if they're splitting hairs between Oklahoma and Notre Dame, or a Big 12 champ and Notre Dame, and they're trying to find a way to separate those teams, I think they'll give the edge to the Big 12 champ because they were frozen out last year. They wouldn't want to see that 2 years in a row unless there's a real clear reason to do it again.
And you look at Notre Dame's schedule. You mentioned the Stanford win if they can get it this weekend, but really up to now their best wins are Temple and Navy. I mean, USC, Texas, and Georgia Tech, not what they thought they would be at the beginning of the year, and that's really hurt them. Is this the year they finally realize, hey, let's start taking the steps necessary to get full conference affiliation? Because it could really hurt them this year.
I don't think Notre Dame's even thinking about that. But I do think that if it plays out this way and they're left out with one loss behind 4 conference champions, that what will occur to them is the reality that they might have to go undefeated to ever make it into this playoff. Right. Because of that word unequivocally, the chance of you having one loss and being without question better than a one-loss conference champion, those odds are not good. So Notre Dame might just have to make that decision. Would we rather be independent or would we rather give ourselves a better chance of making the playoff? I think their independence is a bigger deal to them.
I think what hurts Notre Dame more than that even this year is just the injuries. They've had lots of injuries, some early in the season. They've trickled throughout the season. And against Boston College, they lost their shutdown corner, Kavari Russell. And he's got a stress fracture in his leg that may keep him out for the playoffs. That's a game changer for Notre Dame. And if the committee is looking at who you are now and how you're playing now, and how you might play going forward, who's there available, they might look at that and have pause about giving the benefit of the doubt to a Notre Dame team that won't be the same team that won all those games earlier.
All right, let's go inside the drive, brought to you by our good friends at DirecTV. You mentioned Oklahoma a little bit there, Trevor. One of the more impressive wins of the year 2 weeks ago in Waco. Now, they backed it up by hanging on to beat the Horned Frogs last Saturday. Here's Jeff Long from the committee explaining why they chose to move the Sooners up into their top 4 this week.
Oklahoma's body of work, they added to it this past week with another top 25 ranked team. So they've done that over the last 2 weeks. So we think adding that to their body of work really propelled them up into that 3rd spot.
They may have the second best win of the year. Some might argue it's the best win at Baylor. Certainly you can talk about Michigan State at Ohio State. But they probably have the worst loss among all the teams competing as well when you talk about body of work. So what is it that Jeff Long and the committee is looking at specifically with them?
Well, I think he mentioned it in a different answer last night, which is that when Baker Mayfield was in the game for Oklahoma last week, they dominated TCU. It was when he went out that they started to have trouble. Now, look, there are a lot of teams that are having issues keeping quarterbacks healthy, and that's kind of part of it. But I think the fact that Mayfield is going to be back this week and they expect him to play, they're looking at Oklahoma as clearly a top 4 team when Baker Mayfield is in the lineup. And I think that's what the committee is looking at when they rank Oklahoma at number 3.
Smells like an eye test to me, doesn't it, Trevor?
That dreaded eye test. Well, we had that dreaded eye test last year with Cardale Jones with Ohio State, didn't we?
Yeah.
Their starter, J.T. Barrett, was injured in the last regular season game. The committee didn't downgrade them. They waited to see how the 3rd-string quarterback now, Cardale Jones, would do in the one game they had to evaluate him before the final rankings. That's the Big 12 or Big 10 championship game. Jones participated in obliterating Wisconsin in that game. He played very well, and the committee said, okay, good. They're still the same team, even with this backup in there. And I think there are teams around the country right now that have that same situation. One of them is Baylor. Their 3rd-string quarterback with Chris Johnson having to come in and has one game or two now to show the committee what he can do. And Baker Mayfield has one game to show the committee that he can come back healthy.
You mentioned that news from Baylor, that coming down, not unexpected today at all, that Jarrett Stidham now out for the remainder of the regular season. Art Briles said he could be back for the bowl game wherever Baylor ends up, but he's got the broken ankle. He's got all kinds of issues, the wrist, the back. So hello, Chris Johnson, quarterback number 3 for the Bears. 2 beautiful touchdown passes last week. How good will he look Friday in Fort Worth? After a week of practicing with the ones, we're going to find out. 7:30 on ESPN. Get your shopping done early, Brad. I know you like to get out there on Black Friday. Heat up those leftovers. Trevor, I know you like to do that on Black Friday.
No leftovers. It's all gone. It's all new food.
And then on Saturday, you don't want to miss this one. Bedlam.
3 with their win over TCU. He figured they would pass Ohio State and Oklahoma State, who lost, but they also jump Iowa and Notre Dame, who won. Baylor is up 3 with the win in Stillwater, and the Cowboys tumble from 6 to 11.
So, naturally, there's turnover at the top of ESPN.com's Big 12 power rankings. Cowboys loss to the Bears has them down to 3. Oklahoma is up from 2 to 1. The Bears are second. Horned Frogs stay 4th despite their loss in Norman. Mountaineers, they get bowl eligible with that win over Kansas. And K-State, what an incredible rally with 2 touchdowns in the final 42 seconds. And Phil Snyder was happy for the win, but he said it was tempered a little bit by Paul Rhodes losing his job after. So here's the scenario as far as the Big 12 championship is concerned. If Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State,
say this really
right,
slow.
Write this down.
Yeah.
I'm going to quiz you after the show.
Because you went through this before.
Quiz coming up.
Yeah.
This one is simple. Oklahoma wins Saturday.
I get it.
They are the champions of the league. Baylor, they need Oklahoma State to beat Oklahoma. And then the Bears have to beat TCU this week, and then they host Texas next week. Got to win those 2.
Right.
Got to have a loss by Oklahoma first. Oklahoma State can still win it. They have to beat Oklahoma and have Baylor lose to either TCU, you with me, or Texas next week.
Okay.
I think the important thing is, John, there's going to be a winner. There's going to be a winner out of the Big 12.
It's going to be a definitive champion.
Definitive champion.
Yeah.
How important is that?
I think it's huge. We talked about it last year. Part of the reason I still think that the Big 12 was left out of the playoff last year was just a muddled situation. It was an easy choice for the committee to walk out to that ledge and look at the Big 12. There was co-champs. It was not a very clear picture for them, and I think that's going to be big. I think in this instance, if it is Oklahoma, if they can get the win on Saturday in the Bedlam game, I think it helps the conference that it's a big brand name.
All right, so let's start right there when we talk about the college football playoff rankings. Obviously, Oklahoma is in very good shape when it comes to that. If they go ahead and win out, now bear in mind, you can argue, they lost to Texas, Notre Dame beat Texas. Iowa's strength of schedule, Oklahoma's strength of schedule. But if Oklahoma, without playing the final weekend of the regular season, because there's not a conference championship game, is Oklahoma going to make the college football playoff if they beat Oklahoma State?
I like that chance of that happening primarily because, and I shared this with you last week, I think Stanford beats Notre Dame, and I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around Iowa getting through the rest of their season and the title game. So I think both those teams are going to fall out of that. I think if Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State with the big brand name, with their strength of schedule, I understand the Texas loss kind of pulls them back a little bit. But I still think there's going to be 2 spots in the top 4 as we sit here today that are going to allow Oklahoma to get in that mix.
So that would allow Michigan State to go ahead and be in there, and Oklahoma too, potentially. What about a one-loss Oklahoma State or a one-loss Baylor team as a conference champion?
I think that's an opportunity, obviously, but I think the big brand name and the recognition and the fact I like Oklahoma's ability, especially if they finish off Oklahoma State in the Bedlam game on national television on a big stage without having a conference championship game. You talked about Oklahoma State. I think they could be sitting right there, especially in a scenario where an Iowa goes down or Notre Dame goes down. So I like both of those teams. I'm not sure about Baylor. I think they're going to have a huge marquee win in terms of they're going to have a lot of flash for them to get back into that, in my opinion.
And obviously they've got to beat TCU, and then they've got to polish off Texas to have any chance to get into the mix. Do you think all of this causes, Notre Dame's not going to play the final weekend of the regular season either. You talk about non-conference scheduling. Do you think now a second season with the college football playoff and seeing the ramifications will cause anybody to change things scheduling-wise or anything else?
Well, this is where it catches up to you. That's why I've been a big proponent, especially early in the season. Go play an NC State, or go play a mid-tier FBS.
Go play Mississippi State, somebody like that.
Or some brand recognition, because this is the time where those things catch up to you when they start looking at the body of work, and when your margin of error is very small, and then they start looking at your first 3 games of the year. You'd like to have a brand name on there to help build your body of work. So, yeah, I think it's a hot topic across the country for every AD, and I think it pays to go play somebody, at least a brand name, early in the season.
So we have thrown the scenarios out there for you. 2 huge games this weekend, starting with Bedlam, where College game day will be. Sooners and Cowboys on Saturday. Not only the Big 12 title, but potentially a spot in the Final Four on the line. Will Baker, the touchdown maker, be able to go? And if not, can Rudolph guide the Cowboys closer to another conference crown? Plus, thanks to Baylor and TCU for giving all of us a reason to avoid the calamity that is Black Friday at the mall and shopping centers. Stay home and watch these 2 teams play. Maybe Trevon Boykin comes back, and who might the Bears have to play at quarterback? A preview next.
Big 12 This Week is presented by Back to Big 12 This Week, presented by Dr. Pepper.
Will we have a champion, or will the Bears still be playing for the conference title next week? Either way, we'll preview Texas at Baylor and our first appearance of our college basketball analyst, Brendan Manzer. That's next week on Big 12 This Week, 5 o'clock Eastern, Wednesday on ESPNU. All right, warning, Horned Frog fans, avert your eyes here. This is last October in Waco. TCU led 58-37 with about 11 minutes to play. But Bryce Petty to Antoine Goodley. Corey Coleman catches a touchdown pass. And Chris Callahan comes on for the game-winning field goal as time expires. 61-58 Baylor. Game had over 1,250 yards of offense. It set defenses back about a quarter century, I think, in the Big 12
That didn't help
conference.
in the national stats, on the defensive side anyway.
And so I suppose that there's revenge, maybe. These 2 sides don't like each other. You know, there's animosity
they do
in
not
Bedlam.
like each other.
This is like Bedlam south of the border, I think. But we got to talk quarterbacks. Think about this, John. From this time a year ago, Baylor is 4 quarterbacks in. It was Bryce Petty this time last year.
Check. Pretty good.
Bryce
Did
Petty.
pretty good.
Yeah, he was good. Seth Russell was really good.
Check.
Jarrett
Pretty
Stidham
good.
looked pretty good, but he's battling all kinds of injuries. Chris Johnson, well, he comes in, throws for a couple of scores, and runs for another one. Heck,
Is there
why
anybody
wouldn't-
else?
I don't know. There may be another guy on the bus.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they be confident if he's the guy who has to go for him?
I don't think that they're not confident.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you got Katie Cannon, Corey Coleman, Devin Chafin, Shock Linwood. I mean, you got the weapons behind you. Just don't crash the car.
Exactly.
Just keep it between the white lines. Don't speed. 10-2 on the wheel. He's going to be
Keep
fine.
it between the navigational
That's it,
beacons.
man.
That's it.
Yeah.
man.
I mean, just...
And then the other side of things, Trevon Boykin might play in this game. He has practiced some this week. Of course, injured against Kansas. Did not play against Oklahoma last week, but he's been around practice. Either way, you've got Colehausen, who leads the comeback last week against Oklahoma. You've also got Foster Sawyer, who has shown flashes. So assess TCU's quarterback situation.
I think you're in a better situation if you're Baylor versus TCU. Personally, I thought for sure Trevon Boykin was going to. I mean, he doesn't look like a guy that's in major pain. So I would be surprised if we didn't see the ball rolled out there with Boykin. If it doesn't happen, then I think it becomes a different deal for the TCU offense because obviously you have Aaron Green running the football. With the loss of Josh Doxson, it makes it very hard to create those explosive plays without a Boykin in the lineup. So I'd be surprised if we didn't see a lot of him or some of him.
Baylor has won 3 of the last 4 games in this series. These rivals have played 115 times. Baylor has a 1-game advantage in the series. It's been tight going back to the old Southwest Conference. Can't wait to watch that one and stay away from the malls on Friday night. Up next, Sonic Shake of the Week. Oh, I'm not sure they could tackle Aaron Green in a phone booth right there. Your Sonic Shake of the Week. Plus, John's picking some winners for this weekend on Big 12 This Week.
Baylor, already down their #1 quarterback to a season-ending neck injury, have now lost their #2 in Jarrett Stidham. I'm Antonietta Collins. Stidham is out for the season with a broken bone in his ankle. Let's bring in Big 12 reporter Max Olson. Max, who will now lead the Bears, hopefully, for the rest of the season?
Well, they're going to go with Chris Johnson, who's a sophomore and who certainly does not have the experience that their #1 quarterback, Seth Russell, had. He actually moved to receiver this season when Jarrett Stidham beat him out for the #2 quarterback job, and has actually been spending his time in receiver meetings leading up to Russell's injury. So there's certainly some catching up that he'll have to do here in this shortened week before Baylor takes on TCU. Definitely a very interesting athlete, a big body guy who can run a little bit, but you know it's going to be a big challenge to take on this TCU defense for a guy that is probably going to be a little bit rusty, even though he was so effective with 3 touchdowns against Oklahoma State in the second half last week.
And what about R. Biles and his quarterback situation? Is there a plan just in case if, let's say, number 3 goes down?
Yeah, Art Briles said this week that they're still trying to figure that out. He didn't name his new backup because they still hadn't told those guys who was going to be asked their leading receiver, Corey Coleman, the Blitnikoff finalist, if he was willing to take some snaps, and he was all for it if they need it. But Baylor is definitely going to have to figure out an emergency plan in case they lose another quarterback.
Max, just how disappointing is this for Baylor dealing with the injuries, a team that came in blowing out opponents at a record pace, and now look at their situation?
Well, it's funny. Baylor still believes they can win the Big 12, and you look at their situation. If Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma, Baylor wins out, the Bears are going to be a Big 12 champion for a third straight year, and that they still might finish number 1 in passing efficiency and QBR and all that stuff, despite having to play 3 quarterbacks this year. So I think they really do trust in their system. Certainly, it's disappointing in this Baylor TCU game. It is not going to probably live up to the hype that everyone expected all season long with all the injuries that both teams have had. But, Baylor does believe in Chris Johnson and believe they still have a chance.
Once again, Max Olson on quarterback Jarrett Stidham out for the rest of the season with a broken bone in his ankle. For the latest on the Bears, make sure to keep it locked right here on our college football page on ESPN.com.
Several weeks ago, the Baylor-TCU game looked to be the it game on the Big 12 calendar. It certainly was last season, the one that determined a lot in the college football playoff race. Unfortunately, TCU, with their injuries piling up, a couple losses in recent weeks, it's not as significant for the Frogs, but it could be significant for Baylor heading into Amon G. Carter Stadium. Baylor's at number 7 in the college football playoff rankings. It could rise into the top 4 if things go their way. They need Oklahoma to lose against Oklahoma State. And certainly to win out against Texas. So this is a really important game for Baylor. They're also banged up, hoping to get Jarrett Stidham back, their quarterback, from injury. But they showed against Oklahoma State that regardless of who's on the field, they can stretch a defense and punish a defense. And TCU's defense is nowhere near what we thought it would be entering the year. Now, TCU, to their credit, they played hard against Oklahoma with their third-string quarterback coming in there and making plays. They nearly won that game in Norman, so they're not going to lie down. But I like Baylor, too much offensive firepower. I know last year's game was a shootout. I think Baylor will put up a lot of points. I don't think TCU matches them this year. The Bears win in Fort Worth and stay alive in the college football playoff race.
So, Kirk, I'll ask you the same question. Give me a team not in the top 4 of the rankings last week that should be in it this time.
I think Michigan State, based on their 3 wins against potentially top 15 opponents. If you look at Oregon this week, depending on where they end up, a team that they beat early in the year, and right now an Oregon team that's playing as well as anybody out west. So I would say Michigan State, and I think Oklahoma as well. I think Oklahoma has a very, very strong case just because of the way they've been playing the last 5 weeks. Those are the 2 teams I would have up in the top 4 to go along with Alabama and Clemson.
So let's go ahead and start the countdown now. We'll start at number 25 and give you the latest rankings from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. Temple at 9-2. The Owls need to win their final game to get into the American Championship game. College Football Playoff rankings brought to you by Chick-fil-A. Mississippi State, after its win over Arkansas, sitting at 21, and UCLA playing for the Pac-12 South.
Yep, UCLA, Utah taking a big drop there too.
You see 16 through 20. How about Mike Leach's Washington State Cougars getting in at number 20 and TCU slipping a spot?
You know what? Not just TCU slipping, but you look, Wisconsin is now out of there, and that's going to be on Iowa's resume. As we move forward, those top 25 wins are going to be important.
And as Kirk accurately noted, all of a sudden, isn't it funny how the season ebbs and flows? The Oregon win when Michigan State had it was great. Then it was awful because nobody thought the Ducks were any good. Then Vernon Adams gets healthy. Now the Ducks are good again, and it's a victory over the 17th ranked team in the country, according to the selection committee. Oklahoma State's first loss drops them from 6 to 11. And then you look at Florida, Florida State, North Carolina, and Navy, rounding out 11 through 15. The Gators take a tumble after a terrible performance against Florida Atlantic.
Back-to-back, too. You watch them against Vanderbilt. You know, they've been struggling on the offensive side of the ball, and the committee's taking notice.
It really brings up an interesting question, I think, about Florida. And I have a huge opportunity against Florida State and possibly Alabama if Alabama ends up winning the SEC West. But would they jump high enough if they win those last 2 games? So we have it now through 11. Let's look at the team making the top 10. It is Michigan. Michigan and Ohio State, a 10 versus 8 game at noon on Saturday. Stanford slips up a couple of spots and Baylor's sitting there lurking if just enough chaos comes around.
You know what? But Stanford being ahead of Oklahoma State as we move forward, let's say Oklahoma wins against Oklahoma State, and let's say Notre Dame beats Stanford. The fact that Stanford's ranked higher, this could mean more to Notre Dame's resume if it comes down between Oklahoma and Notre Dame at the end.
I think Stanford's schedule, top to bottom, is one of the toughest in the country, too.